They didn't even look up when I walked into the conference room. Thomas Reed, the CEO's nephew and newly appointed VP of Operations, sat at the head of the glass table like he owned the building itself. His Italian suit perfectly pressed, platinum, watch glinting under the recessed lighting. He was smiling, that practiced corporate smile that never quite reaches the eyes. Next to him, Vanessa Chen, HR director, avoided my gaze entirely, her tablet clutched to her chest like a shield. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I hadn't even taken my seat when Thomas said it. We're restructuring the department, he announced, voice clipped and efficient. Your position has been eliminated, effective immediately. He didn't even blink. Vanessa nodded beside him, a rehearsed robotic gesture. All the paperwork has been prepared, she added, sliding a folder across the polished surface. The room felt suddenly airless, like someone had cranked the thermostat up 20 degrees. I stood there, still holding my morning coffee, security, badge dangling from my neck, the same badge I'd worn proudly for 7 years at Meridian Tech Solutions. I scanned their faces, looking for some hint of recognition for everything I'd built here. Nothing. Just the cool, practiced indifference of people who'd already moved on to the next item on their agenda. My name is Ellie Parker, and for 7 years, I was the Senior Client Partnership Manager at Meridian Tech Solutions, one of the fastest-growing software integration companies in the Midwest. I had built our client portfolio from a handful of local businesses to over 40 major accounts across 3 states. My relationships with those clients weren't just professional, they were personal. I knew their kids' names, their anniversary dates, which clients needed extra hand-holding and which preferred minimal contact. What Thomas Reed didn't know, couldn't know, was that I'd structured those relationships very carefully. Every contract, renewal, every service agreement had been drafted with precision. These weren't corporate partnerships. They were partnerships with me. I took the manila folder with steady hands, though my pulse hammered in my throat. 7 years, I said quietly. I've been with Meridian for 7 years. Thomas glanced at his watch. We appreciate your contributions, he replied without looking up. The words sounded pre-recorded, a corporate platitude pulled from some HR handbook on terminations. Vanessa will walk you through the separation package and exit procedures. I sat down slowly, my knees barely holding my weight. The chair felt unfamiliar, as if overnight I'd become a stranger in the space I'd helped build. Meridian had been a struggling regional IT support company when I joined. Now it handled enterprise-level systems integration for clients worth billions. Clients I had brought in, clients who trusted me. Is Richard aware of this decision? I asked, mentioning the company's founder and CEO, Thomas's uncle. Richard Blake had personally hired me years ago, back when Meridian operated out of what was essentially a glorified storage unit in downtown Columbus. Thomas's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Uncle Richard is stepping back from day-to-day operations. The executive team unanimously approved the restructuring. The way he emphasized executive team made it clear this was his decision alone, rubber-stamped by whoever owed him favors. I see, I said, though I didn't see it all. Nothing about this made sense. My client retention rate was 96%. My accounts represented nearly 60% of the company's recurring revenue. I had just closed the Hamilton deal last month, our largest contract to date. Vanessa cleared her throat, finally making eye contact. We'll need your badge, company phone, and laptop before you leave. Your personal items will be packed and sent to your home address. Her voice had the practiced neutrality of someone who had delivered this speech dozens of times. Perhaps she had. I nodded mechanically, processing her words while my mind raced. Ahead. The Westfield contract was up for renewal next week. The Peterson Group had been waiting on my call about their system upgrade. AmeriCorp's CTO had just emailed me yesterday about expanding their service package. "What about my clients?" I asked, knowing the answer but needing to hear it. Thomas offered that same empty smile. "They're Meridian's clients. Jordan Miller. We'll be taking over your accounts effective this afternoon. We've prepared transition emails that will go out by end of day." Jordan Miller. Of course, Thomas's former college roommate, hired 3 months ago with a vague job title and an office suspiciously close to the executive suite. He had spent exactly 0 time learning our systems or meeting any clients. "Jordan doesn't know these accounts," I said, working to keep my voice level. "These relationships took years to build." Thomas waved his hand dismissively. "Business is business, Ms. Parker. Clients stay with Meridian for our services, not for individual employees." He checked his watch again, making it clear our time was up. "Vanessa will handle the rest." I stood up, clutching the termination packet. As I turned to leave, Thomas added, "Oh, and we'll need you to sign the non-compete agreement in that folder. Standard procedure." I paused, hand on the door. Non-compete wasn't part of my original employment contract. Thomas's smile tightened. "It's a condition of receiving your severance package, 2 weeks' pay as a courtesy." 2 weeks, after 7 years, after millions in revenue I'd generated, after countless weekends and late nights ensuring our clients got exactly what they needed. I didn't respond. I simply walked out, past the glass-walled offices where curious eyes pretended not to watch, past the collaborative workspaces I'd helped design, past the awards wall featuring accolades for accounts I had secured. My desk was already being cleared by a facilities person I didn't recognize. A cardboard box held the sad remains of my professional life. A framed photo of my sister's family, a dead plant I'd been meaning to replace, a coffee mug from the Westfield team with an inside joke printed on it. I handed my badge to Vanessa, who had trailed silently behind me. "I'll need a moment with my personal phone," I said, not asking permission so much as stating a fact. She nodded nervously. 15 minutes to collect your things and log out of any personal accounts on company devices." I didn't need 15 minutes. I needed 5. I opened my personal phone, scrolled to a specific number, and composed a text message. Simple, direct. "It's happened. Executing Plan B. Call me." I pressed send and watched the message wing its way to Meredith Zhao, the lawyer I'd consulted 3 months ago when Thomas first arrived and began his corporate reshuffling. Meredith had listened carefully to my concerns back then. She'd reviewed all my client contracts, employment agreements, and the intellectual property clauses that covered the custom client management system I had developed for Meridian. She hadn't made promises, but she had helped me prepare. Just in case. I handed my company phone and laptop to Vanessa without unlocking either. "I believe you have the passwords on file," I said. She nodded, clearly uncomfortable with the entire situation. "For what it's worth," she whispered as she walked me to the elevator. This wasn't my decision. I looked at her, really looked, and saw the shadows under her eyes, the slight tremor in her hand as she pressed the down button. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Another casualty of Thomas Reed's corporate ambitions, just moving more slowly toward the chopping block. "Document everything, Vanessa," I said quietly as the elevator doors opened. "Trust me on that." The doors closed on her startled expression. And just like that, 7 years of my professional life ended with the antiseptic ping of an elevator reaching the lobby. I didn't cry in my car. I didn't scream or pound the steering wheel or call friends to vent. Instead, I sat perfectly still, hands at 10 and 2, staring at the Meridian Tech Solutions logo adorning the side of the building I had helped fill with clients and revenue. The modern glass structure gleamed in the April sunshine, indifferent, to the small human dramas playing out inside its walls. My phone buzzed with Meredith's response. My office, 2 p.m. Then another message from a number I didn't immediately recognize. Heard what happened. This is Alan from Westfield. Call me ASAP. And so it begins, I thought, starting my car and pulling away from the company I had helped build, the company that had just made the biggest mistake of its corporate life. The offices of Zhao and Associates occupied half a floor in a downtown high-rise, with views of the river and the state capitol building beyond. Meredith's corner office projected exactly the image she cultivated: successful but not flashy, professional but not intimidating. She greeted me with a firm handshake and gestured to the sitting area where a leather portfolio already lay open, post-it notes marking specific pages. You were right, she said without preamble as we sat down. They moved faster than we anticipated, but not faster than we prepared for. I nodded, feeling the first stirrings of something beyond shock. Not quite satisfaction, not yet, but perhaps its precursor. 2 weeks severance and a non-compete. I never agreed to originally. Meredith's expression darkened. Did you sign anything? Of course not. She nodded approvingly. Good. Now I've already received calls from Westfield, Peterson, and AmeriCorp. Word travels fast. I wasn't surprised. Alan from Westfield and I had built their entire integration system together, working weekends and pulling all-nighters to meet their launch deadline. Christine at Peterson had specifically requested me in their last contract renewal. And John at AmeriCorp had been a mentor early in my career before he became their CTO. What are they saying? I asked, though I could guess. Meredith allowed, herself a small smile. They're concerned about their projects. They're concerned about continuity of service. They're concerned about working with someone named Jordan who they've never met. She paused. They're also very interested in the clause you insisted on including in all their contracts. The clause. Section 7B, paragraph 3 in every client agreement I'd structured for the past 4 years. Client Success Personnel Continuity Guarantee. A small addition that most corporate clients appreciated but rarely scrutinized deeply. It essentially stated that the designated client success manager, me, was guaranteed as their point of contact for the duration of the contract, and any change would require client approval and a 60-day transition period. If the client didn't approve the change, or if the transition period wasn't honored, they had the option to terminate the agreement without penalty and receive a prorated refund of any prepaid services. That's more than 30 major contracts with that clause, I said quietly, including Hamilton, which they just prepaid for the year. That's almost $4 million they'd have to refund immediately. Meredith's smile widened slightly. 37 contracts, to be precise. And yes, the immediate financial exposure is significant. But the real damage would be to their cash flow projections. They've already recognized that revenue. They've already made commitments based on those projections. I leaned back in my chair, the full weight of the situation settling over me. Thomas doesn't know, does he? Based on how they handled your termination? Not a chance. They would have approached this very differently if they understood the contractual implications. My phone buzzed again. 3 more messages from clients. Then an email notification from Jordan Miller. Need all client files and contact info ASAP. I showed Meredith the email, and she shook her head. Don't respond to anything from them yet. Let me handle the communication. She pulled out another document from her portfolio. Now, let's talk about your client management system. The system. My nights and weekends project that had transformed how Meridian tracked client preferences, service histories, and relationship details. The system I had built using my personal development environment, on my own time, because the company's existing tools were inadequate. I had brought it to Meridian as a completed project, allowing them to use it while maintaining the intellectual property rights. It's covered under the IP agreement we drafted last year. Meredith confirmed. You granted them a license to use it while you were employed there. Now that your employment has been terminated, the license is revoked, I finished. They have no right to continue using it. Meredith nodded. Exactly. And without that system, they lose access to 7 years of institutional knowledge about those client relationships. All the notes, preferences, historical context, gone. The reality of Thomas's miscalculation was becoming clearer by the minute. He hadn't just fired an employee, he had severed a carefully constructed network of relationships, contractual, obligations, and proprietary systems that kept Meridian's largest clients happy and their revenue flowing. What's our next move? I asked. Meredith checked her watch. Right about now, Westfield, Peterson, and AmeriCorp should be sending formal notices invoking the Personnel Continuity Clause. By end of day, I expect at least a dozen more to follow. Suit. She handed me a document. This is our cease and desist letter regarding the client management system. I'll send it first thing tomorrow, after they've had a chance to digest the contract issues. I reviewed the letter, which outlined in clear, unemotional language exactly what Meridian could and could not do with my system. They couldn't access it. They couldn't modify it. They couldn't reverse engineer it. They had exactly 24 hours to export any critical client data before their access would be terminated completely. Won't they fight this? I asked. Meredith shrugged. They can try. But the IP agreement is solid, and they signed it. As for the client contracts, those are between Meridian and the clients. If the clients choose to enforce their contractual rights, that's their prerogative. My phone buzzed yet again. This time it was a call, not a text. Richard Blake, the CEO himself. Meredith raised an eyebrow as I showed her the screen. Sooner than I expected, she said. Your choice whether to answer. I let it go to voicemail. Richard had been a mentor once in the early days, but he had allowed his nephew to dismantle the company culture he had built, piece by piece. He had allowed Thomas to target long-standing employees for termination, replacing them with his own network of fraternity brothers and country club connections. Whatever Richard had to say, it could wait. What happens now? I asked Meredith as she gathered her papers. Now? Now we wait. By tomorrow morning, Meridian will be facing a client revolt, potential revenue loss in the millions, and the disappearance of their client management infrastructure. She gave me a level look. They'll call you desperately. When they do, we'll be ready to negotiate from a position of strength. I nodded, suddenly exhausted as the adrenaline of the day began to fade. And if they don't call? Meredith's expression softened slightly. They'll call, Ellie. Trust me. And in the meantime, we have interest from 3 clients who want to know if you'd consider working with them directly. I left Meredith's office with a clearer sense of direction than I'd had walking in. Thomas Reed had made a catastrophic error, born of arrogance and inexperience. He thought business was just numbers on spreadsheets, names on contracts. He didn't understand that in the service industry, relationships were the actual product. Trust was the actual deliverable, and he had just destroyed both. I drove home to my apartment in the historic district, a renovated factory space with exposed brick and tall windows. I'd bought it 2 years ago when Meridian gave me my last promotion. It had felt like putting down roots, committing to the company and the city long term. Now I wasn't so sure. Maybe this was an ending, but also a beginning. Maybe Thomas Reed had inadvertently done me a favor. I kicked off my heels, poured a glass of wine, and settled on my balcony overlooking the small courtyard below. My phone continued to buzz with messages from clients, from former colleagues, even one from Vanessa asking if I was okay. I responded only to the clients, with brief professional reassurances that I would be in touch soon. Just as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across my living room, my phone lit up with a text from Meredith. Meeting set with Richard Blake. tomorrow, 9 a.m., my office. Be ready." I smiled for the first time that day. Thomas Reed had fired me without knowing I held the company's most valuable assets, their client relationships, their institutional knowledge, and the technical infrastructure that managed both. Tomorrow, I would begin to show him exactly what that mistake would cost. But tonight, I would rest. Tomorrow would require all my strength, all my professionalism, and all my resolve. Because while Thomas had treated business as just business, I knew better. Business was people, relationships, trust. And trust, once broken, comes at a premium to rebuild. The next morning dawned clear and cool, a perfect spring day in Columbus. I dressed carefully, not in the business casual that had become Meridian's norm, but in the kind of power suit I reserved for major client presentations. Charcoal gray, impeccably tailored, with a silk blouse in deep burgundy. Battle armor. I arrived at Meredith's office 30 minutes early, giving us time to review our strategy. She greeted me with a cup of coffee and a thin folder. "Updates," she said, handing me the folder. 17 clients have now formally invoked the continuity clause. That represents about $43 million in annual revenue. She sipped her own coffee. Also, 3 employees from your former team have resigned effective immediately. I flipped through the documentation, recognizing client letterhead and the precise language of corporate discontent. Any response from Meridian? Nothing official yet, but my contact in their legal department says it's chaos. Apparently, Thomas Reed spent the night calling emergency meetings with their corporate counsel. Meredith allowed herself a small smile. The phrase catastrophic oversight was used. At precisely 9 a.m., Meredith's assistant announced Richard Blake's arrival. He entered alone, a surprise, as I had expected Thomas to accompany him. Richard looked older than when I'd last seen him at the company holiday party 4 months ago. The lines around his eyes had deepened, and his trademark silver hair seemed thinner. "Ellie," he said, his voice carrying the weight of the situation. He extended his hand, which I shook firmly. "I think we have some things to discuss." Meredith gestured to the conference room, where water, coffee, and a plate of untouched pastries awaited. We took our seats, Richard on one side, Meredith and I on the other. "I'll come straight to the point," Richard began. "What happened yesterday was unacceptable. I was out of the country, in meetings with potential investors. I didn't authorize your termination. I kept my expression neutral. Yet, it happened, Richard, with your company's letterhead on the documents and your HR director in the room." He sighed heavily. "Thomas has been making changes. Some I approved, some I delegated. This was neither." He leaned forward. "I want to make this right, Ellie. Tell me what you need to come back." Meredith and I exchanged glances. This was the opening we had anticipated, but Richard's apparent distance from the decision was unexpected. "Before we discuss Ellie's potential, return," Meredith said smoothly. "We need to address the current situation. As of this morning, 17 major clients have invoked their contractual rights under the continuity clause. Additionally, Meridian is currently using proprietary software to which they no longer have a valid license." Richard's face paled slightly. 17? That's nearly half our client base. 43% of your annual revenue, I corrected, gently. With more likely to follow once they hear about the situation. Jordan Miller has already reached out to several, apparently. Richard rubbed his temples. "I knew nothing about this clause in the contracts. Our legal team—" "Your legal team approved every contract," I said. "The clause wasn't hidden, Richard. It was transparent and beneficial to the clients, which is why they all accepted. It had guaranteed them consistency in their most critical vendor relationship." "And the software? What software are we using unlicensed?" I explained the client management system, watching understanding dawn on his face. 7 years of client preferences, communication histories, project notes, personal details about key stakeholders, all housed in a system that Meridian no longer had the right to access. Richard stared at the conference table for a long moment. Thomas doesn't understand what he's done, does he? No, I said quietly. He doesn't. Richard looked up, his expression a mixture of resignation and determination. What do you want, Ellie? Meredith slid a document across the table. We've prepared some terms that would resolve the situation. Richard picked it up, scanning the pages with growing disbelief. This is significant. So is the damage, Meredith replied evenly. The terms were straightforward. I would return to Meridian as the newly created Chief Client Officer, reporting directly to the CEO, Richard, with full autonomy over the Client Services Department. My compensation would include a substantial salary increase, equity in the company, and a seat on the executive leadership team. Thomas Reed would have no authority over my department or my client relationships. And most importantly, my client management system would be formally licensed to Meridian under terms that protected both my intellectual property rights and the company's operational needs. Additionally, Meredith continued, there will be a formal acknowledgement to all clients that the personnel change was made in error, with appropriate apologies. Richard set the document down. And Thomas? That's your family matter, I said, carefully. But he cannot have authority over client relationships or the teams that support them. That's non-negotiable. Richard nodded slowly. He's young, ambitious. But this. He gestured to the client letters. This has shown me he's not ready for the role I gave him. Meredith produced another document. If the terms are acceptable, we can resolve this immediately. The clients have agreed to withdraw their notices if Ellie returns in this capacity. Richard studied me for a long moment. You had this planned. You knew this could happen. I met his gaze steadily. I hoped it wouldn't. I built my career at Meridian, Richard. I believe in what we do and the clients we serve. But yes, I protected myself, and by extension, the client relationships I've spent years building. Smart, he said finally, a hint of his old mentorship tone returning. Exactly why we need you. He picked up the pen Meredith offered and signed. The agreement. 3 hours later, I walked back into Meridian Tech Solutions, not through the lobby and up the elevator as a visitor, but through the executive entrance, with a new security badge that designated my C-suite status. Richard had called an all-hands meeting for 2 p.m. where he would announce the organizational changes and my new role. As I passed the glass-walled conference room where I'd been fired just yesterday, I saw Thomas Reed sitting alone, head in his hands. Richard had already had his conversation with him. Thomas would remain at the company, but in a much diminished role, focusing on internal operations where his cost-cutting efficiency might actually be valuable rather than destructive. Vanessa from HR was the first to spot me walking through the open office area. Her eyes widened in shock, then understanding as she took in my confident stride and the executive badge. "Welcome back," she said, genuine relief in her voice. "Thank you," I replied. "I'll need to meet with you later about rebuilding my team." She nodded eagerly. I saved their files, just in case. Smart woman, I thought. She would do well in the new Meridian. By the time I reached my new office, corner, with windows overlooking the city and the company's name illuminated against the sky, word had already spread. Former team members appeared in my doorway, questions in their eyes. I assured them things would be explained at the all-hands meeting. At 1:55, my phone buzzed with a text from Alan at Westfield. Heard the news. Smart move on their part. Looking forward to continuing our work. I smiled, setting my phone aside as Richard appeared in my doorway. "Ready?" he asked. I nodded, gathering my notes for the announcement we had carefully crafted together. As we walked toward the company gathering space, I glanced at the awards. Wall we passed. The visible recognition of client success that had largely come through relationships I had built. "You know," Richard said quietly as we approached the waiting employees, "Thomas told me you were expendable, that anyone could manage client relationships with the right systems in place." He shook his head. "He didn't understand that you are the system." I thought about the past 7 years, the late nights, the weekend calls, the personal touches that transformed professional relationships into genuine connections. I thought about the contract clause that saved my career and the foresight that protected my work. "Business is relationships, Richard," I said as we reached the podium. "I'm glad we remembered that in time." As I faced the assembled employees, some confused, some hopeful, all attentive, I knew this wasn't just a victory for me. It was a reminder that in a world increasingly driven by metrics and algorithms, the human element remains irreplaceable. Connections matter, trust matters. And sometimes, the person you underestimate turns out to be the one holding everything together. Thomas Reed had fired me without knowing I held the company's main contracts. But in doing so, he had inadvertently revealed just how valuable I truly was. Not just to Meridian, but to every client who had come to rely on me as their trusted partner. That realization wasn't just worth my new title and compensation. It was priceless. I spent that first evening after being fired in a strange state of numbness mixed with clarity. The shock of termination was still fresh, but beneath it ran an undercurrent of something stronger. As I sat in my apartment, phone buzzing constantly with messages from clients and colleagues, I realized that what Thomas Reed had done wasn't just unfair, it was monumentally short-sighted. My living room had become an impromptu command center. Laptop open on the coffee table, legal documents spread across my couch, and a half-eaten container of takeout pushed to one corner. The lights of downtown Columbus twinkled beyond my windows as night fell, but I barely noticed. I was too busy, responding to concerned messages from clients who'd somehow already heard about my departure. The first call that truly shifted the dynamics came from Christine Walsh, CFO at Peterson Group. I'd worked with Christine for nearly 5 years, helping their company transition from legacy systems to a cloud infrastructure that saved them millions annually. More than that, I'd helped Christine convince her skeptical board that the investment was worthwhile. "Ellie, what the hell is going on?" Christine demanded when I answered. "I just got the most generic email from someone named Jordan saying he's taking over our account. No introduction, no transition plan, nothing." I chose my words carefully. "Meridian has decided to restructure. My position was eliminated this, morning." The silence on the other end lasted so long I thought we'd been disconnected. Finally, Christine spoke, her voice deadly calm. "They did what? Without consulting us? Without honoring the 60-day transition period in our contract?" And there it was, the first domino. "I believe they may not have fully reviewed all contractual obligations," I replied diplomatically. "Well, I'm reviewing ours right now," Christine said, and I could hear papers rustling. Section 7B, paragraph 3. The continuity guarantee. "We agreed to a 3-year contract with Meridian specifically because you included this clause. We're in the middle of our financial system upgrade, for God's sake. This is breach of contract, plain and simple." I listened, as Christine worked through her initial shock toward righteous indignation. "I'll have our legal team send formal notice first thing tomorrow," she concluded. "This is completely unacceptable. Have other clients been notified?" "I believe so," I said. "The transition emails went out company-wide." Christine's laugh was sharp. "Oh, they have no idea what they've just done, do they? I have the CIOs of Westfield and AmeriCorp on my industry committee. We're meeting for drinks tomorrow night. I can guarantee this will be the main topic of conversation." After we hung up, I felt the first flutter of what might have been satisfaction. Not because I wanted Meridian to suffer. I had given too. much of myself to the company to wish for its downfall. But Thomas Reed had acted with such casual disregard for the complexity of client relationships that part of me needed him to understand the consequences. Within the hour, my phone lit up, with a call from Alan Matthews, Westfield's Director of Technology. I had spent countless nights troubleshooting with Alan during their system integration, ordering midnight pizza and working through technical challenges until dawn. He had been one of my first major clients at Meridian, and his company's success story had become a cornerstone of our marketing. "Just got the most bizarre email from Meridian," Alan said without preamble. "Some guy I've never met is supposedly taking over our account? Please tell me this is a mistake." I explained the situation as objectively as I could, but Alan cut me off halfway through. No, this won't work at all," he insisted. "We specifically added language to our contract about continuity of service. You're named in that document, Ellie. We're in the middle of planning the second phase of our integration. The team only approved the budget because they know and trust you." His voice dropped slightly. "Look, I need to be straight with you. Our CEO got wind of this and he's furious. That section in our contract about the transition period and client approval? He's instructed legal to enforce it immediately. They're preparing a formal notice as we speak." By midnight, I had received similar calls from 5 more clients. Each conversation followed the same pattern: disbelief, anger, and then the sudden realization that they had contractual recourse. The clause I had carefully crafted years ago, initially as a way to reassure nervous clients about continuity of service, had become an unexpected shield. I forwarded each message to Meredith, who responded with brief but encouraging updates from her end. The legal machinery was beginning to turn. By morning, the first formal notices would land on Meridian's desks, each one invoking Section 7B, Paragraph 3, each one demanding adherence to the 60-day transition period and client approval rights, or threatening contract termination and refund demands. Just after 1 a.m., when I was finally about to try to sleep, my phone chimed with another message. This one wasn't from a client, but from Devi Patel, the lead developer on my team at Meridian. I hadn't expected to hear from internal staff so soon. "They locked us out of the client management system," her message read. "IT said the license is under review. Jordan is freaking out because he can't access any of the client notes or history. Emergency meeting called for 7 a.m. What's going on?" I stared at the message, a slow smile spreading across my face. Of course, someone in IT or legal must have realized that my client management system wasn't actually Meridian property. The license agreement I had negotiated clearly stated that my employment was a condition of use. Once Thomas terminated me, he had inadvertently terminated their right to use the software that contained 7 years of client relationship data. I didn't respond to Debbie right away. Instead, I sent a screenshot to Meredith with a short message. "Phase 2 already. Starting." Her reply came immediately. "Faster than expected. Get some sleep. Tomorrow will be eventful." I finally collapsed into bed, mind still racing. In less than 24 hours, the table had completely turned. I had walked into that conference room as an employee being discarded. Now I had become the linchpin that could determine Meridian's survival. Not because I had schemed or plotted revenge, but simply because I had been careful enough to protect the value I created, both in my client relationships and in my technical contributions. The next morning dawned bright and clear. I woke early, made coffee, and dressed with deliberate care in a navy pantsuit that I reserved for important client presentations. Whatever happened today, I wanted to face it with dignity and composure. My phone had accumulated a dozen more messages overnight. 3 more clients had reached out directly. Devi had sent another text at 5:30 a.m. All hands emergency meeting called for 9 a.m. Legal team looking panicked. Jordan keeps asking for client files that don't exist outside your system. I smiled into my coffee cup. The client management system had been my passion project, Born out of necessity when Meridian's outdated CRM couldn't handle the nuanced relationship data I needed to track. I had built it on weekends and evenings, using my own development environment, carefully documenting my ownership from the start. When it became clear how valuable it was, I had approached Richard with a formal licensing agreement rather than simply handing over my intellectual property. At the time, Richard had been impressed with my foresight. "Smart to protect your work," he had said while signing the agreement. "Too many people give away their best ideas." Thomas Reed clearly hadn't bothered to review that agreement before firing me. Now the company was discovering that they had lost access to the system that housed every client preference, every project note, every relationship milestone, and every communication history for their major accounts. At 8:30 a.m., my phone rang. Unknown number. "Ellie Parker," I answered, keeping my tone neutral. "Ms. Parker, this is Jeffrey Williams, General Counsel for Meridian Tech Solutions." His voice was formal but strained. "I wonder if you might be available for a meeting this morning to discuss your departure from the company." "I've engaged representation," I replied. "Meredith Zhao of Zhao and Associates. Any discussions should include her." There was a pause, then a carefully controlled sigh. "Yes, we've already received correspondence from Ms. Zhao this morning. Perhaps a joint meeting would be appropriate. We seem to have several matters to discuss." "I'll have Meredith contact you to arrange it," I said, then added, "I understand there may be some urgency on your end." Another pause. "There are certain operational aspects that would benefit from prompt resolution," he admitted. "We've received some communications from clients that raise concerns." I nearly laughed at the understatement. Communications likely meant formal legal notices threatening contract termination and demands for millions in refunds. Concerns probably meant full-blown panic at the executive level. "I'll have Meredith reach out immediately," I promised, then ended the call. 10 minutes later, Meredith confirmed that a meeting had been set for 11 a.m. at her offices. "They wanted neutral ground," she explained, "and they're bringing the big guns. General Counsel, CFO, and Richard Blake himself." "No Thomas?" I asked, surprised. "Apparently not," Meredith said, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. "I suspect his star may be falling quite rapidly this morning." I arrived at Meredith's office 30 minutes early, giving us time to prepare. Her corner office overlooked the Columbus skyline, the Meridian Tech Solutions building visible in the distance. It felt symbolic somehow, observing from a position of strength the company that had so casually discarded me just yesterday. "We've received formal notices from 12 clients so far," Meredith reported as we reviewed documents. "That represents just over $30 million in annual revenue. 4 have explicitly threatened immediate contract termination if the continuity clause isn't honored." I nodded, scanning the notices. The language varied, but the message was consistent. They had contracted with Meridian with the understanding that I would manage their relationship. Any change required their approval and a formal transition, and they were not inclined to approve my replacement with someone they had never met. "What about the software issue?" I asked. Meredith smiled. "Our cease and desist letter regarding unauthorized use of your intellectual property was delivered at 8 a.m. Based on what we're hearing, they're in quite a state trying to figure out how to function without it." She slid a document across the desk to me. "This is our proposed resolution framework. Review it and let me know if you want any changes." I read through the terms carefully. They were bold, but not vindictive. A pathway for Meridian to resolve the crisis while acknowledging my value. My reinstatement at an executive level with appropriate compensation and authority. A formal licensing agreement for my client management system, and a restructuring of certain operational areas to ensure client relationships were protected going forward. "This is exactly right," I said, handing it back. "Fair, but firm." Meredith nodded approvingly. "They're in a difficult position. The client notices alone represent an immediate financial threat. Add the loss of the management system, and they're essentially flying blind with their most valuable relationships. They need resolution quickly, which gives us leverage, but not so much that we become unreasonable. At precisely 11 a.m., Meredith's assistant announced the arrival of the Meridian contingent. They filed into the conference room looking considerably more strained than I had ever seen them. Jeffrey Williams, the general counsel, led the way, followed by Diane Foster, the CFO. Richard Blake entered last, his usual commanding presence diminished by what appeared to be a sleepless night. Introductions were brief and formal. We sat across from each other at the polished conference table, the morning sun streaming through the windows, illuminating the tension in the room. "Thank you for meeting with us," Jeffrey began, his voice carefully modulated. "We believe there have been some misunderstandings regarding Ms. Parker's separation from Meridian that we'd like to address." Meredith raised an eyebrow. "Misunderstandings? My client was terminated without cause after 7 years of exemplary service. Clients representing more than $30 million in annual revenue have already formally invoked their contractual rights under agreements Ms. Parker structured. And Meridian is currently using proprietary software to which their license was explicitly tied to Ms. Parker's employment." She paused. "Which part is a misunderstanding?" Jeffrey shifted uncomfortably. Richard Blake leaned forward. "Let's dispense with the legal dance," he said, his voice carrying the weight of his authority despite the circumstances. "A serious error in judgment was made. Thomas acted without my knowledge or approval while I was traveling. By the time I was informed, the damage was already in motion." He turned to me directly. "Ellie, I've reviewed the client notices. I've seen the licensing agreement for your system. And most importantly, I've looked at the client relationships and revenue you've generated for this company." He paused. "I was wrong to give Thomas that level of authority without proper oversight. You deserved better from me and from Meridian." The admission hung in the air, unexpected in its directness. Diane Foster, the CFO, nodded in agreement, then added, "The financial implications of losing those client relationships would be catastrophic. We're not just talking about immediate revenue loss. We're talking about shareholder value, market, position, everything we've built over the past decade." "And without the client management system," Jeffrey added, "we have no way to effectively manage those relationships, even if we could preserve them. The institutional knowledge contained in that system is effectively irreplaceable." I maintained my composure, though internally I felt a surge of validation. For years, I had carefully built both the client relationships and the systems to manage them, always aware of their value, but never fully recognized for it. Now, sitting across from Meridian's leadership team, I was finally being acknowledged, not just as an employee, but as a creator of core business value. "What is it you want, Ellie?" Richard asked bluntly, cutting through the tension. Meredith slid our resolution framework across the table. "These are our terms for resolution. As you'll see, they're designed to address the current situation while creating a sustainable path forward for all parties." They reviewed the document in silence, expressions shifting as they absorbed the terms. The reinstatement at executive level, the compensation adjustment, the licensing agreement for my software, the organizational restructuring that would remove Thomas Reed from any authority over client relationships. When they finished reading, Richard looked up first. "This is substantial." "So is the value Ms. Parker has created," Meredith countered. "And so is the damage that would result from failing to resolve this promptly." Diane, ever the numbers person, spoke next. "The compensation increase and equity grant are significant, but frankly, less than the cost of losing even one major client." She glanced at Richard. "From a purely financial perspective, these terms are actually quite reasonable." Jeffrey studied the document again. The organizational restructuring is delicate. Thomas is family. Richard's expression hardened slightly. Thomas made this mess. His judgment has been questioned. Family or not, there are consequences. He turned back to me. If we agree to these terms, all of them, how quickly can you address the client situation? They need reassurance from you directly. I can begin making calls immediately, I replied. The formal notices allow for the 60-day transition period to be waived if the designated relationship manager is reinstated. Most will likely withdraw their notices once they hear from me. Richard nodded slowly. And the system? How quickly can access be restored? As soon as the new licensing agreement is executed, I can reactivate access. No data has been lost. It's simply locked pending proper authorization. The three of them exchanged glances. Then Richard nodded to Jeffrey, who pulled out his laptop. I'll have our legal team draft the formal reinstatement and new employment agreement immediately. We can have it ready for signature within the hour. Meredith smiled slightly. We've taken the liberty of preparing the necessary documentation as well, she said, producing a folder of legal papers. Everything from the employment agreement to the software licensing terms, all ready for execution. Jeffrey reviewed our documents with professional thoroughness, but his expression betrayed his relief at not having to draft everything from scratch under pressure. These are comprehensive, he admitted, and largely aligned with what we would propose. For the next hour, the five of us worked through the details. My new title, Chief Client Officer. My reporting structure, direct to Richard with no intervening layers. My compensation, a 70% increase plus equity that would vest over 3 years. My authority, complete autonomy over client relationships and the teams supporting them. And most significantly, Thomas Reed would be reassigned to internal operations with no authority over my areas of responsibility. As the final documents were being prepared for signature, Richard asked for a moment alone with me. Meredith hesitated, but I nodded my agreement. The others filed out, leaving us in the conference room with the Columbus skyline stretching out beyond the windows. I built that company on relationships, Richard said quietly, nodding toward the Meridian building visible in the distance. I knew every client by name. I remembered their kids' birthdays, their vacation plans, their personal challenges. Somewhere along the way, I lost sight of that. I started seeing spreadsheets instead of people. He looked genuinely pained. Thomas is like that too. All numbers, no nuance. I thought he could learn the other parts, but he shook his head. He doesn't understand what you built, Ellie. The contracts, the system. Those aren't just tools or documents. They're the architecture of trust. I felt a surprising wave of empathy for Richard. He had been a mentor once before he started stepping back from daily operations. It's not too late, I said, for the company or for Thomas. This can be a learning moment, not just a crisis. Richard smiled faintly. Always seeing the bigger picture. That's why clients trust you. He extended his hand. I'm sorry it took this to make me see your true value to Meridian. It won't happen again. We shook hands, and in that moment, I felt the balance of power shift permanently. I wasn't just being rehired, I was being acknowledged as essential to the company's survival. The documents we would sign weren't just restoring the status quo. They were creating a new reality where my contributions would be properly valued. When the others returned, the signing proceeded without further drama. Each signature represented another piece of validated worth. My client relationships, my technical innovation, my strategic foresight. By early afternoon, it was done. I was officially Meridian's new Chief Client Officer, with the authority, compensation, and recognition that the role deserved. As we prepared to leave, Diane handed me a company phone and new executive access. It has been instructed to restore your email and system access immediately, she said. Your new office is being prepared. The executive suite, corner office. I accepted the items with a nod of thanks. The speed of the reversal was almost dizzying, from terminated employee to C-suite executive in less than 36 hours. Not because I had maneuvered or manipulated, but because I had built genuine value that could not be easily replaced. My phone buzzed with notifications. More client messages, colleagues wondering what was happening, even one from Thomas Reed himself, though I chose not to read that one yet. There would be time for that conversation later, when emotions had cooled and perspectives had adjusted. "What happens now?" Meredith asked as we watched the Meridian team depart. "Now I start making calls," I replied. "Clients first. They need to hear directly from me that their relationships are secure." I paused. Then the team. They deserve to know what's happened and what it means for them. Meredith smiled, satisfied, with the outcome but already shifting into next steps. And Thomas? I considered the question carefully. That's Richard's responsibility for now. Thomas needs to understand why this happened, not just accept that it did. That takes time. As I gathered my things to leave, I felt a curious sense of calm replacing the emotional turbulence of the past 2 days. The client contracts that I had so carefully structured, the management system that I had built night after night, the relationships that I had nurtured year after year, all of these had served their purpose, not just as business tools, but as reflections of value that could not be dismissed or discarded. Thomas Reed had fired me without understanding what I truly held. He saw my role as a job function, easily replaced. He didn't recognize that I had become the infrastructure connecting Meridian to its most valuable assets, its clients. In his narrow focus on organizational charts and payroll costs, he had missed the ecosystem of trust and mutual benefit that I had cultivated. That oversight had cost him dearly, both professionally and personally. But it had also created an opportunity for me, for the clients, and even for Meridian itself, to rebuild around a more authentic understanding of value. As I stepped out into the bright Ohio sunshine, my phone rang again. Alan from Westfield, likely having heard rumors of my return. I answered with my new title, feeling its weight and responsibility. "Chief Client Officer," Alan repeated, impressed. "So they finally figured it out." "Let's just say we reached a mutual understanding," I replied, smiling. "Well, whatever. You call it, I'm glad you're back. We're still on for the Phase 2 planning session next week?" "Absolutely," I confirmed. "With a few new ideas I think you're going to appreciate." We chatted briefly about the project, the conversation flowing, easily back into its familiar rhythm. This was where the real value lived, not in contracts or systems, though those were important, but in the invisible threads of trust and mutual respect that connected people across company boundaries. Thomas Reed had tried to sever those threads with a single careless decision. Instead, he had only revealed how strong and essential they truly were. And in doing so, he had inadvertently created the conditions for them to be properly recognized and valued. Sometimes I reflected as I headed toward Meridian to claim my new office. You have to lose something to discover what it's really worth. Thomas had nearly lost everything for Meridian. I had nearly lost a career I'd spent years building. But through that near catastrophe, we had all discovered something invaluable about the true architecture of business success. It wasn't about titles or org charts or cost-cutting efficiencies. It was about relationships, trust, the human connections that turn transactions into partnerships. I had always known this instinctively. Now, thanks to Thomas Reed's misguided decision, the entire company would understand it too. And that understanding would be built into the foundation of Meridian going forward, not just in principle, but in policy, structure, and leadership. Starting with my new corner office and the transformation it represented, Thomas Reed had fired me without knowing I held the company's main contracts. But in the end, what I truly held was something far more valuable than legal documents or software systems. I held trust, and that, as Meridian had nearly learned the hard way, was the one thing no company could afford to lose. My first day back at Meridian as Chief Client Officer felt surreal. The executive assistant assigned to me, Jennifer, a poised woman with an impressive background in corporate operations, guided me through my new corner office on the top floor. The space was 3 times larger than my previous workspace, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Columbus's skyline and the river beyond. A sleek mahogany desk dominated one end, with a comfortable seating area arranged at the other. My name and title already adorned the door and desk plaque: Ellie Parker, Chief Client Officer. The IT team has configured your new laptop and restored access to all systems, Jennifer explained, gesturing to the slim device centered on the desk. And they're standing by whenever you're ready to reactivate the client management system. I nodded, running my hand along the desk's polished surface. Thank you. Could you schedule a team meeting for my department at 2 p.m. in the main conference room? And I'll need the contact list for all clients who sent formal notices. Jennifer made notes on her tablet. Already compiled and loaded into your calendar. Richard also asked if you could join the executive leadership meeting tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. It's your formal introduction to the team. The executive leadership team. My new peers. The thought still hadn't fully sunk in. Of course, I replied. Please block the time. After Jennifer left, I sat down at my desk and logged into my new laptop. The familiar Meridian logo appeared, but everything else felt different. My permissions had been elevated to executive level, giving me access to financial data, board communications, and strategic planning documents I'd never seen before. My email signature now included my C-suite title and a direct line that bypassed the company switchboard. But what truly caught my attention was the flood of emails already waiting. Dozens from clients expressing relief at my return, team members seeking guidance, and even several from board members I'd never directly communicated with before. One email in particular stood out, sent by Richard just 30 minutes earlier to the entire company. I am pleased to announce the appointment of Ellie Parker as Meridian's new Chief Client Officer, effective immediately. Ellie has been instrumental in building many of our most valuable client relationships over the past 7 years, and will now lead all client service operations as a member of the executive leadership team. This newly created position reflects our commitment to placing client relationships at the center of our organizational strategy. Please join me in congratulating Ellie on this well-deserved promotion. No mention of my termination, no explanation of the chaos of the past 2 days, just a neat corporate narrative of promotion and strategic realignment. I closed the email and opened the client management system, entering my credentials to unlock the software that had become the unexpected leverage in my reinstatement. The familiar interface appeared, displaying the comprehensive relational database I'd built over years of client interactions. Every preference, every project note, every milestone and communication, all organized in an intuitive system that had become essential to Meridian's client operations. I sent the reactivation command, knowing that across the building, teams would be sighing with relief as their access was restored. Then I turned my attention to the client calls that couldn't wait. First on my list was Christine at Peterson Group. She answered on the first ring. Ellie, is that really you? We've been getting the strangest messages from Meridian. It's me, I confirmed, calling from my new office as Chief Client Officer. There was a pause, then a delighted laugh. Well, that was fast. Yesterday they're firing you. Today you're in the C-suite? I need this story over drinks. I smiled. It's been an eventful 48 hours. But the important thing is that all your projects will continue as planned, with me still leading the relationship.
Yeah.
So our formal notice worked, Christine said, satisfaction evident in her voice. I knew that clause would come in handy someday, though I didn't expect it would be like this. Your notice, and many others, I acknowledged. The continuity clause turned out to be more significant than anyone anticipated. Including Thomas Reed, I bet, Christine added with a touch of schadenfreude. Never liked that guy. Met him at the industry gala last month. All flashy watch and empty conversation. Kept talking about streamlining operations like it was some revolutionary concept. I chose my words carefully. There have been some organizational adjustments. Thomas is focusing on internal operations now, away from client relationships. Translation: he's been put in a corner to think about what he did. Christine laughed. Well, their loss almost became our crisis. We're in the middle of our financial systems upgrade, for God's sake. The thought of starting over with someone new gave our CTO heart palpitations. We chatted for a few more minutes about her project timelines before ending the call. Similar conversations followed with Alan at Westfield, John at AmeriCorp, and 8 other major clients who had sent formal notices. By noon, I had secured verbal commitments from all of them to withdraw their termination threats, conditional on receiving written confirmation of my new role. At 1:30, just before my department meeting, Richard appeared in my office doorway. He looked better than he had at the legal meeting, more rested, more like the confident CEO I remembered from my early days at Meridian. Getting settled in? He asked, gesturing at the office. Still feels a bit surreal, I admitted. But yes, I've spoken with the clients who sent notices. They've agreed to withdraw them once they receive formal confirmation of the continuity. Guarantee. Richard nodded, relief evident in his expression. Good. That's excellent news. He paused, then added, I wanted to speak with you before your team meeting, about Thomas. I kept my expression neutral. What about him? Richard sighed, moving fully into the office and taking a seat across from my desk. He's my sister's son. Bright kid, excellent education, but he trailed off, searching for words. He lacks something essential, the human element. He sees business as an equation to optimize, not relationships to nurture. That's a significant blind spot in our industry, I observed. Yes, it is, and an expensive lesson for him to learn. Richard looked out at the Columbus skyline for a moment. I've reassigned him to operations analytics, reporting to our COO. No direct reports, no client contact. He's not happy about it. I could imagine. Thomas Reed had clearly expected to be fast-tracked to leadership based on family connection. Now he had effectively been demoted, his authority stripped, his judgment publicly questioned. He wants to speak with you, Richard continued. To apologize, he says. I told him it's your decision whether to hear him out. I considered this carefully. Part of me wanted nothing to do with Thomas Reed. His casual dismissal had upended my life, even if temporarily. But another part recognized that if I was to be effective in my new role, I needed to resolve this tension rather than allow it to fester. I'll speak with him, I decided. But not today. I need to focus on stabilizing the client relationships and reassuring my team. Richard nodded. That's fair. I'll let him know. He stood to leave, then hesitated. There's something else you should know, Ellie. Something that may help explain Thomas's actions, though not excuse them. I raised an eyebrow, waiting. The day before he terminated you, Thomas presented me with a proposal to outsource much of our client management to a third-party firm. Lower costs, standardized processes. Richard's expression darkened. A firm that his business school roommate recently started. The pieces clicked into place. Thomas hadn't just fired me as part of some abstract restructuring. He had been clearing the way for a self-serving arrangement, removing me as an obstacle to a plan that would have benefited him personally. I see, I said quietly. And did you approve this proposal? Richard shook his head firmly. I told him I needed to review it more thoroughly. I was suspicious of the timing and the connection. That's why I was out of town, meeting with industry colleagues to discreetly assess this firm's reputation. His mouth tightened, which is essentially non-existent. They've never handled accounts of our size or complexity. The revelation sent a chill through me. Thomas hadn't just made a misjudgment about my value to Meridian. He had actively plotted to replace our client management infrastructure with an untested firm run by his friend, potentially putting millions in revenue at risk for his personal gain. "Thank you for telling me," I said, processing this new information. "It provides important context." Richard nodded grimly. "I believe in transparency with my executive team. You're part of that team now, which means you should understand the full picture." He moved toward the door. "Good luck with your department meeting." After he left, I sat motionless, absorbing the implications of what I'd learned. Thomas Reed hadn't just undervalued me. He had deliberately targeted me to make way for a self-serving scheme. The knowledge shifted something in my perspective, hardening my resolve while clarifying the true stakes of what had nearly happened to Meridian. At 2 p.m. sharp, I walked into the main conference room where my team, now officially my department, waited. 20 faces turned toward me, expressions ranging from confusion to relief to cautious hope. Devi, my lead developer, broke into a spontaneous grin when she saw me. Ryan, my senior client manager, looked like he might applaud. Others seemed more reserved, uncertain about what my return meant for the organizational chaos of the past 2 days. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," I began, taking a position at the head of the table. "As you may have heard, there have been some significant changes at Meridian. I've been appointed Chief Client Officer, leading a newly expanded department that consolidates all client relationship functions." I paused, looking around the room. I know the past 48 hours have been confusing and stressful for everyone. Projects were disrupted, access to systems was revoked, leadership messages were contradictory. For that, I apologize. Not because it was my doing, but because you deserved better. The tension in the room visibly eased as I acknowledged the reality of what they'd experienced rather than glossing over it with corporate platitudes. "So here's where we stand," I continued. "The client management system has been reactivated. All client relationships will continue under our existing team structure. The organizational changes announced yesterday regarding the restructuring have been reversed." Ryan raised his hand. "What about Jordan Miller? He's been running around demanding client files and project histories since yesterday afternoon." A ripple of nervous laughter circulated the room. "Jordan will be transitioning to another role," I said diplomatically. "He will not be involved in client management going forward." Devi spoke up next. "And Thomas Reed? He was the one who—" She trailed off, perhaps remembering that criticizing the CEO's nephew might still be dangerous territory. "Thomas will be focusing on operational analytics," I replied, using Richard's careful phrasing. "He will not have oversight of our department or any client relationships." The relief in the room was palpable. Whatever Thomas Reed had done during his brief tenure of authority had clearly left its mark on the team. "I know you all have questions about what happened and what it means for the future," I acknowledged. "The simplified version is this: client relationships matter. They're not just entries in a database or names on contracts. They're the lifeblood of this company, built on trust and continuity of service. The past 2 days have reinforced that reality at the highest levels of Meridian." I spent the next hour outlining my vision for the department, answering questions, and reassuring the team that their positions were secure. By the time we finished, the mood had transformed from anxious uncertainty to cautious optimism. People left the conference room with clearer direction and renewed confidence, exactly what was needed to stabilize our client relationships. As the room emptied, Devi lingered behind. She had been my right hand in developing the client management system, contributing elegant code solutions to challenges I had identified from the relationship side. "I saved a backup," she confessed in a low voice once we were alone. Of the system. When they locked us out yesterday, I got nervous. I had a recent copy on my development server. I was going to call you about it, but then everything changed so fast. I smiled, appreciating her loyalty. That was smart thinking. But let's keep that between us. The situation has been resolved through official channels now. She nodded, relieved. It's good to have you back. Nothing made sense without you here. She hesitated, then added, Jordan had no idea how anything worked. He kept asking for the client files, like they were physical folders in a cabinet somewhere. When we told him everything was in your system, he just got angrier. The image of Jordan floundering without access to the relationship infrastructure I'd built was admittedly satisfying, but I kept my expression professional. Well, that's behind us now. We have work to do. The Hamilton implementation needs our attention, and Peterson is halfway through their upgrade. After Devi left, I returned to my new office to find a visitor waiting. Vanessa Chen, the HR director, who had sat silently beside Thomas during my termination. She stood as I entered, her posture rigid with discomfort. Ellie, she began, her voice strained. I wanted to speak with you personally. About yesterday. I gestured for her to sit down, taking the chair beside her rather than establishing the power dynamic of the desk between us. Go ahead. Vanessa clasped her hands tightly in her lap. I want you to know that I opposed your termination, strongly. I told Thomas it was a mistake, that your client relationships were too valuable, that there was no transition plan in place. She looked down at her hands. He overruled me, said if I couldn't handle it, he would find someone who could. I studied her carefully. Vanessa had been with Meridian for over a decade, building the HR department from a basic administrative function into a strategic resource. She had always been fair and thoughtful in our previous interactions. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. She met my eyes directly. Because you deserve to know the truth, and because I need to know if I can still work with you effectively in your new role. If my participation in yesterday's meeting has damaged our professional relationship beyond repair, I need to address that head-on. Her honesty was unexpected and refreshing. In the corporate aftermath of crisis, the typical approach was to rewrite history, to pretend conflicts never happened, to create neat narratives that obscured uncomfortable realities. Vanessa was doing the opposite, acknowledging the truth and its potential consequences. I appreciate your candor, I said after a moment. And no, our professional relationship isn't damaged beyond repair. You were doing your job in a difficult situation. Relief softened her features. Thank you. That means a lot. She hesitated, then added, There's something else you should know, something about why Thomas targeted you specifically. My conversation with Richard earlier had already revealed part of this story, but I sensed Vanessa had additional information. I'm listening. Thomas has been reviewing personnel files since he arrived, looking for what he called optimization opportunities. When he came to yours, something caught his attention. Vanessa shifted uncomfortably. You remember that client satisfaction survey from last year? The one where you scored 96% while the company average was 72%? I nodded. It had been a point of pride, though I'd never flaunted the results. Thomas saw that as a threat, Vanessa continued. He told me, and I'm quoting directly here, no one should be that embedded with clients. It creates dependency on individuals rather than the company. He was actively looking for reasons to remove you, Ellie. The restructuring was just a convenient excuse. The revelation wasn't entirely surprising after what Richard had shared, but hearing it stated so plainly still landed with impact. My excellence had made me a target. My success had been viewed as a liability rather than an asset. Did Richard know about this perspective? I asked. Vanessa shook her head. I don't believe so. Thomas was careful to present his decisions, to Richard as purely business-driven, supported by analysis and industry best practices. But behind closed doors, it was different. He saw relationship-based business as outdated, inefficient. He wanted to move toward automated systems, standardized processes, and his friend's company was conveniently positioned to provide those automated systems, I added. Vanessa's eyes widened slightly. You know about that? Richard mentioned it earlier today, I confirmed. It clarifies a lot about Thomas's motivations. She nodded slowly. It was never about your performance or value to Meridian. It was about Thomas's vision for the company, a vision that had no place for relationship managers with strong client connections. She stood to leave. I thought you deserved to know the full truth, not just the corporate version. After Vanessa left, I sat alone in my office as afternoon light slanted through the windows, casting long shadows across the floor. The conversations with Richard and Vanessa had revealed a deeper truth behind my termination, one that went beyond simple misjudgment or cost-cutting measures. Thomas Reed had targeted me because I represented an approach to business that threatened his worldview. While I built relationships, trust, and human connections, he valued systems, processes, and efficiencies. He saw my client loyalty as a structural weakness for Meridian rather than its greatest strength. In a profound irony, it was precisely this misunderstanding that had led to his downfall. The relationship infrastructure I had built, both contractual and technical, had protected not just me, but the very clients Thomas had been so eager to transition to standardized, impersonal management. My phone buzzed with a text from Meredith. How's the first day as CCO going? Clients calming down? I typed back, getting there, learning some interesting background about Thomas's motives. Her response came quickly. Not surprised, men, like him, often see relationships as inefficient compared to systems. They miss that relationships are the system in service businesses. She had captured it perfectly. Thomas saw client relationships as messy, unpredictable, dependent on individuals who could leave or make demands. He wanted to replace them with processes that could be controlled, quantified, and ultimately commoditized, not recognizing that in our industry, the relationship was the actual product we were selling. At 5 p.m., just as I was preparing to leave, for the day my assistant Jennifer appeared in the doorway. Thomas Reed is asking to see you, she said, her tone carefully neutral. He's waiting in the small conference room. I told him you were likely done for the day, but he insisted it would only take a few minutes. I considered declining, pushing the inevitable confrontation to another day when I felt more settled in my new role. But delaying wouldn't make it easier, only extend the period of organizational awkwardness. I'll see him, I decided. But please interrupt in 10 minutes with an urgent call if I haven't returned by then. Jennifer nodded, understanding perfectly. Of course. The small conference room was situated midway between the executive suite and the operational floors, neutral territory in the corporate geography. When I entered, Thomas Reed stood looking out the window, his back to the door. He turned at the sound of my entrance, and I was struck by how different he appeared. From the confident, dismissive man who had fired me 2 days earlier, his normally immaculate appearance showed subtle signs of strain. His expensive shirt slightly wrinkled at the elbows, his hair not quite as precisely styled. The change wasn't physical so much as energetic. The aura of absolute certainty had been replaced by something more tentative. Ellie, he said, gesturing awkwardly to the chairs. Thank you for agreeing to see me. I took a seat, maintaining a professional demeanor. You wanted to speak with me? He sat down across from me, his movements stiff. Yes, I wanted to apologize for how things were handled. I noted his careful phrasing, apologizing, for the method, not the decision itself. Classic non-apology apology. Which aspects specifically? I asked, not making it easy for him. He shifted uncomfortably. The termination, the lack of proper transition planning. It was premature and poorly executed. Again, no acknowledgement that the decision itself had been fundamentally flawed, just regret that it hadn't been implemented more smoothly. "I see," I said neutrally. "Is there anything else?" My calm response seemed to unsettle him further. Perhaps he had expected anger, tears, or eager acceptance of his half-hearted apology. Emotional reactions that would have allowed him to feel either justified or magnanimous. "Look," he said, a flash of his former confidence returning. "Business decisions sometimes have unintended consequences. The restructuring was meant to streamline operations and create more standardized client experiences. I didn't anticipate the contractual issues or the system access problems. In other words, he regretted not doing better homework before trying to remove me, not the actual attempt itself." "Those weren't unintended consequences, Thomas," I replied evenly. "They were predictable outcomes of misunderstanding what business we're actually in." He blinked, clearly not expecting this response. "Excuse me? Meridian isn't in the technology business. We're in the trust business. Technology is just the medium through which we deliver that trust." I leaned forward slightly. "The contracts, the system, the client preferences database, those aren't separate from the relationships. They're extensions of them, tools I built specifically to strengthen and scale those human connections." Thomas's expression tightened. This wasn't the conversation he had prepared for. "You're saying I misunderstood the business model?" he asked, an edge entering his voice. "I'm saying you valued the wrong metrics," I clarified. "You saw individual client relationships as dependencies to eliminate rather than assets to protect. You prioritized standardization over personalization in an industry where the latter commands the premium." He stared at me for a long moment, clearly weighing his response. I could almost see the calculations running behind his eyes. How much? Humility to show, how to salvage his dignity, how to position himself for recovery. "My approach works in many industries," he said finally. "Standardization, automation, removal of individual dependencies. These are proven strategies for scaling businesses. In manufacturing, in commodity services, not in high-trust, high-complexity relationship businesses," I countered. "Not when clients are entrusting their most critical systems and data to our care." He didn't respond immediately, and I realized this conversation wasn't really about an apology. Thomas Reed was trying to understand what had happened, how his seemingly sound business strategy had backfired so spectacularly. He genuinely couldn't see the flaw in his approach. "The client management system you built," he said suddenly. "That's actually an example of systematizing relationships, isn't it? Turning human knowledge into scalable software." I nodded, acknowledging the point. "Yes, but with a critical difference. The system was designed to enhance relationships, not replace them. To extend human capacity for connection, not eliminate the need for it." For the first time, I saw a flicker of genuine understanding in his expression. "I wanted to bring in new core systems to provide similar functionality," he admitted, referencing his friend's company. "But more standardized, less dependent on individual client managers." "And with kickbacks to you, I presume?" I asked bluntly. His face flushed. "Advisory fees. For making the introduction. Standard practice in consulting." "Not when you're an employee of the company being consulted," I pointed out. "That's a conflict of interest, Thomas. One that could have cost Meridian millions in lost clients if your plan had succeeded." He had no response to this, and I decided we had reached the limit of productive conversation. I stood up. "I need to get going. Is there anything else?" Thomas remained seated, looking up at me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. "Just one thing," he said. How did you know to protect yourself? The contract clauses, the software licensing agreement, those were put in place years ago. You couldn't have known I was coming. I smiled slightly. I didn't. But I did know that in business, relationships are both invaluable and vulnerable. I protected them because that's my job, to build and maintain the architecture of trust that keeps clients connected to Meridian. I moved toward the door. Perhaps that's a perspective worth considering in your new role in operations analytics. The implied message was clear: learn from this or continue to fail. Thomas Reed had tried to eliminate me because he saw individual client relationships as inefficient and unscalable. In doing so, he had nearly destroyed the very foundation of Meridian's success, the trust and continuity that kept major clients loyal to the company. As I walked back to my office, I realized that Thomas's fundamental error wasn't unique to him. It reflected a broader tension in modern business: the push to systematize, standardize, and depersonalize relationships in the name of efficiency and scale. What Thomas and others like him failed to understand was that relationships weren't inefficient appendages to be eliminated. They were the actual product, the true value proposition, especially in service businesses built on trust. My new role as Chief Client Officer wasn't just about managing customer relationships. It was about protecting and championing this fundamental truth throughout Meridian, ensuring that in our drive for growth and efficiency, we never lost sight of the human connections at the core of our success. Thomas Reed had fired me without knowing I held the company's main contracts. But what he truly hadn't known was that those contracts were just the visible manifestation of something far more powerful: the architecture of trust I had spent years building, relationship by relationship, interaction by interaction. An architecture that had proven more durable than corporate hierarchy, more valuable than cost-cutting measures, and ultimately more essential to Meridian's survival than any restructuring plan could ever be. 2 weeks into my role as Chief Client Officer, I found myself in Meridian's executive boardroom for the quarterly financial review. The polished table gleamed under recessed lighting, and floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of downtown Columbus. Around me sat the company's leadership team: Richard at the head, CFO Diane Foster to his right, COO Marcus Wagner to his left, and other department heads filling the remaining seats. As the newest member of this group, I was still adjusting to the shift in perspective from executing strategy to shaping it. Client retention rates are stabilized at 97%, up from the projected 68% following the transition event 2 weeks ago, Diane was saying, delicately referencing the chaos that had erupted after my termination and subsequent reinstatement. Revenue projections have been revised upward accordingly. Marcus nodded appreciatively in my direction. The client response to Ellie's return has been overwhelmingly positive. We've actually seen 3 clients increase their service packages beyond previous commitments. Richard looked pleased but not surprised. That's excellent news. The executive team's decision to create the Chief Client Officer position is already proving its value. The subtle reframing of my reinstatement as a planned strategic move rather than damage control didn't escape my notice. But I let it pass. Corporate narratives often sanitized messy realities. As Diane moved to the next financial slide, my phone vibrated with a message. I discreetly checked it under the table. A text from Alan Matthews at Westfield. Need to talk ASAP. Heard something concerning about new core systems approaching our CTO directly. Call when you can. New Core Systems, the company founded by Thomas's friend, the one he had tried to position as Meridian's replacement for our client management infrastructure. What were they doing talking to Westfield's CTO? I made a note to call Alan immediately after the meeting and refocused on Diane's presentation. She was now discussing the financial impact of recent organizational changes. The restructuring of the operations department has resulted in approximately $430,000 in annual savings, she reported, referring to the changes that had followed Thomas's demotion. Additionally, by canceling the proposed third-party contract. That was under review. We've avoided a $2 million expenditure that wasn't accounted for in this year's budget. That caught my attention. The proposed third-party contract was undoubtedly the new core systems deal that Thomas had been pushing. $2 million for an untested system from a company with no significant track record. The numbers made his conflict of interest even more troubling. The meeting continued for another 40 minutes, covering various aspects of Meridian's financial health and strategic positioning. Throughout, I found my thoughts returning to Alan's message. If Nucor was approaching our clients directly, that suggested a concerning pattern, one that might extend beyond Westfield. As soon as the meeting concluded, I returned to my office and called Alan. He answered immediately. "Ellie, thanks for getting back to me so quickly. Listen, something weird happened yesterday. Our CTO, Michael, was approached by someone from a company called Nucor Systems. They claimed to have inside knowledge of Meridian's client management approach and suggested they could offer us similar services at a lower cost." My grip tightened on the phone. Did they mention any names? Or specifics? "That's the concerning part," Alan replied. "They specifically mentioned features of our integration that aren't public knowledge, details about how our systems connect with your platform, customizations we've built together. Information that would only be available to someone with access to our project documentation." A cold feeling settled in my stomach. Did Michael get a name? Who made this approach? Someone named Drew Harrington. Said he was the CEO of Nucor. Michael shut him down pretty quickly. Told him we have a strong relationship with Meridian and aren't looking elsewhere. But the whole thing felt off. How would this company know our specific integration details? I thanked Alan for the information, promised to investigate, and ended the call. Drew Harrington, Thomas's business school roommate. The pieces were falling into place, but they formed a more troubling picture than I had initially suspected. This wasn't just about Thomas trying to bring in his friend's company as a vendor. If Nucor had detailed knowledge of client integrations, someone had shared confidential information with them. I picked up my desk phone and called Jennifer, my executive assistant. "I need to see Devi Patel as soon as possible. Also, I'd like to schedule time with Marcus Wagner this afternoon." Within 20 minutes, Devi was sitting across from me, her expression curious. As the technical lead for our client management system, she had intimate knowledge of all client integrations and customizations. "Thanks for coming up on short notice," I began. "I need your help with something sensitive. Has anyone accessed or exported unusual amounts of client integration documentation in the past few months, particularly for Westfield?" Devi frowned, considering the question. "Not through normal channels. We have audit logs for all system access, and nothing unusual stands out." She paused. "But there was something a few months ago that seemed odd. Jordan Miller asked me for a technical overview of how the system stores client integration specifications. Said he needed it for some executive presentation." Jordan Miller, Thomas's college friend, the one who had been positioned to take over my client relationships. "Did you provide it to him?" "A sanitized version," Devi confirmed. "Nothing with actual client data or specific configurations. But he seemed disappointed with what I gave him, asked if there were more detailed examples I could share." "And did you?" She shook her head firmly. "No way. That would violate our client confidentiality agreements. I told him he'd need proper authorization for anything client-specific." She leaned forward, concern crossing her features. "Why? Has something happened?" I shared Alan's call about Nucor approaching Westfield, watching Devi's expression shift from concern to alarm. "That's a major data security issue," she said immediately. "If they have specific integration details, someone extracted that information from our systems or documentation." "That's what I'm worried about," I agreed. "I need you to do a comprehensive audit of system access logs, document repositories, email attachments, anywhere client integration specifications might be stored or transmitted. Look for unusual patterns, unauthorized exports, anything that doesn't follow standard protocols. Devi nodded, already mentally planning her approach. I'll get a team on it right away. How far back should we look? 6 months minimum. Focus on access by Jordan Miller, Thomas Reed, or anyone closely associated with them. After Devi left, I sat back in my chair, processing the implications. If Thomas and Jordan had extracted confidential client information and shared it with Nucor, this went beyond mere conflict of interest. It represented a potential breach of client confidentiality agreements, a serious legal and ethical violation that could damage Meridian's reputation and expose us to liability. My meeting with Marcus Wagner, Meridian's COO, was scheduled for 3 p.m. As Thomas's direct supervisor in his new role, Marcus would need to be aware of these developments. I spent the intervening time documenting what I knew so far and preparing a structured approach to the investigation. Marcus arrived precisely on time, his methodical nature evident in everything from his impeccably organized notebook to his precise movements. A former military officer who had transitioned to corporate operations, he brought a disciplined perspective to Meridian's internal processes. I appreciate you making time on short notice, I began after we'd settled in my office's seating area. Something concerning has come to my attention that involves Thomas Reed and potentially impacts both our client relationships and our data security. I outlined what I had learned from Alan at Westfield and my subsequent conversation with Devi. Marcus listened intently, taking occasional notes but mostly absorbing the information with a deepening frown. This is troubling, he said when I finished. If confidential client information was shared with an external company, especially one with a connection to Thomas, we're looking at potential violations of several policies and possibly legal agreements. Exactly my concern, I agreed. Devi Taiwa is conducting a technical audit of system access, but I think we need a broader investigation. Email communications, file transfers, meetings that may not have been logged in official channels. Marcus nodded decisively. I'll bring in our security team. They can conduct a thorough review of all digital communications without tipping our hand. He paused, considering his next words carefully. Thomas has been resistant to his new role. Still seems to believe his restructuring vision was correct and was only derailed by technicalities. If he's involved in this Nucor situation, it suggests he hasn't accepted the reality of his position, or that he's actively working against Meridian's interests, I added, voicing the concern that had been growing since Alan's call. Marcus's expression hardened. That would be career-ending, family connection or not. He stood up. I'll initiate the security review immediately and personally monitor Thomas's activities more closely. In the meantime, it might be prudent to reach out to other major clients to see if they've been approached by Nucor as well. Over the next 3 days, a careful investigation unfolded. On the surface, business at Meridian continued as usual. But beneath that normality, multiple teams were working to uncover the extent of potential information sharing with Nucor systems. I personally contacted our top 15 clients, framing my inquiries carefully to avoid creating undue alarm. By the end of the second day, 3 more had reported being approached by Nucor with suspiciously detailed knowledge of their Meridian integrations. In each case, Drew Harrington had made the pitch, suggesting that Meridian was planning to standardize its client management approach and that Nucor offered a more personalized alternative. Meanwhile, Devi's technical audit began yielding results. She requested a private meeting on Thursday afternoon, bringing with her a secure laptop containing her findings. "We found something," she said without preamble as she set up the laptop in my office. "About 3 months ago, Jordan Miller used his network credentials to access the secure document repository where client integration specifications are stored. he downloaded complete technical documentation for 7 of our largest clients, including Westfield, Peterson Group, and AmeriCorp. She pulled up the audit logs, showing Jordan's access timestamps and the specific files he had retrieved. These downloads occurred outside normal business hours and weren't associated with any approved project or client request. That's concerning but not definitive, I noted. He could claim he was trying to familiarize himself with the client systems for legitimate business purposes. Devi nodded. That's what I thought too. But then we found this. She navigated to another screen showing email logs. 2 days after those downloads, Jordan sent multiple large encrypted files to an external email address. We couldn't see the content because of the encryption, but our security team traced the recipient address. She highlighted the email address, Darrington@newcoresys.com. Drew Harrington at Newcore, I said quietly. Exactly. And there's more. Devi pulled up a calendar entry from Jordan's Meridian account. The day after he sent those emails, he had a meeting scheduled with Thomas Reed at an off-site location, a coffee shop downtown. The meeting was titled NC Strategy Discussion and wasn't on his official work calendar. We only found it because the security team did a device backup recovery. The picture was becoming clearer, and it was more troubling than I had initially suspected. Jordan had accessed confidential client information, shared it with Newcore, and then met with Thomas off-site to discuss what appeared to be a Newcore strategy. This is extremely valuable, Devi. Have you shared these findings with anyone else? She shook her head. Only the security team members directly involved in the audit, and they've been instructed to maintain strict confidentiality. Marcus asked to be briefed once we had concrete findings, but I wanted to come to you first. Good. I'll coordinate with Marcus on next steps. In the meantime, continue the audit and see if you can find any direct communications between Thomas and Newcore. After Devi left, I immediately called Marcus to share the findings. His response was measured but resolute. This is more than enough to justify formal action, he said. I'll brief Richard and our legal team. We'll need to conduct official interviews with both Jordan and Thomas, following HR protocols for potential termination cases. The machinery of corporate investigation moved swiftly after that. By Friday morning, both Jordan and Thomas had been called to separate meetings with HR, legal, and their respective supervisors. I was not present for either meeting, but Marcus kept me updated on developments. Jordan, confronted with the technical evidence of his unauthorized access and external sharing of confidential information, apparently crumbled quickly. According to Marcus, he admitted to providing client integration specifications to Newcore at Thomas's direction, in exchange for a promised position at Newcore once their partnership with Meridian was formalized. Thomas's meeting proved more contentious. He initially denied any knowledge of information sharing, then attempted to frame it as standard vendor evaluation when presented with evidence of the off-site meeting with Jordan. When confronted with Jordan's direct testimony about his involvement, he reportedly shifted to attacking the investigation itself as a witch hunt designed to discredit him. By Friday afternoon, the formal decision had been made. Jordan was terminated immediately for violating client confidentiality agreements and data security policies. Thomas, despite his family connection, was placed on administrative leave pending a final determination by Richard and the board of directors. At 4 p.m., Richard called an emergency meeting of the executive leadership team to address the situation. We gathered in the boardroom, the atmosphere tense and somber. Richard looked older than he had just days before, the strain of the situation etched in the lines around his eyes. I won't sugarcoat this, he began once everyone was seated. We're facing a serious breach of client trust and corporate ethics. The evidence against Jordan Miller is clear-cut and resulted in immediate termination. The situation with Thomas is more complicated given his family relationship, but equally concerning in its implications. He took a deep breath before continuing. Thomas has been placed on administrative leave while the board reviews the evidence. I've recused myself from that decision given the conflict of interest. Regardless of the outcome, we need to address the potential damage to our client relationships and corporate reputation. Diane Foster, the CFO, spoke up. We should assess the financial exposure immediately. If clients believe their confidential information has been compromised, we could face contract terminations, legal action, or demands for compensation. Agreed, Richard said. Ellie, as CCO, I'd like you to develop a client communication strategy. How do we disclose this situation transparently without creating unnecessary panic? The question was challenging. We needed to maintain client trust through honesty while preventing a mass exodus that could damage Meridian beyond repair. I believe we should take a tiered approach, I suggested after a moment's consideration. For the 7 clients whose information we know was compromised, we need direct, personal conversations, full disclosure of what happened, what steps we've taken in response, and what additional security measures we're implementing. Marcus nodded in agreement. We should also offer them independent security audits at our expense to verify that their systems haven't been compromised. For our broader client base, I continued, a more general communication about enhanced security protocols and leadership changes, without specifically mentioning the data breach unless we find evidence their information was also accessed. The discussion continued for nearly 2 hours as we developed a comprehensive response plan. By the end, assignments had been distributed, timelines established, and messaging approved. Richard would personally join me for conversations with the directly impacted clients. Marcus would oversee an expanded security audit to ensure no other breaches had occurred. Diane would prepare contingency plans for potential financial impacts. As the meeting was concluding, Richard's assistant appeared at the door with an urgent message. He read it, his expression darkening further. It seems Thomas has decided not to wait for the board's decision, he announced. He just submitted his resignation, effective immediately. And according to security, he's currently clearing out his office. Marcus immediately stood. I'll ensure all his system access is terminated and monitor what he removes from the premises. Richard nodded gratefully. Thank you, Marcus. Ellie, could you stay behind for a moment? As the others filed out, Richard moved to the window, staring out at the city skyline as afternoon faded toward evening. For a long moment, he didn't speak. I should have seen this coming, he finally said, his voice heavy with regret. The signs were there. Thomas has always been ambitious, but I never thought he would cross ethical lines so blatantly. Family relationships can cloud our judgment, I offered, not to absolve him but to acknowledge the complexity of his position. He turned to face me. That's generous of you, considering what he tried to do to your career. He shook his head slowly. You know, when I gave Thomas that VP role, I truly believed he could grow into it, that my sister's son could help secure. Meridian's future as my own role diminished. Instead, he nearly destroyed what we've built. The vulnerability in his admission was unexpected. Richard Blake, the confident CEO who had built Meridian from a small regional IT provider into a major integration firm, rarely showed uncertainty or acknowledged mistakes. What concerns me most, I said after a thoughtful pause, isn't Thomas's actions, but what they reveal about his fundamental misunderstanding of our business. He saw client relationships as obstacles to efficiency rather than the foundation of our value proposition. Richard nodded slowly. A perspective I fear is becoming increasingly common in business. Relationships are messy, human, difficult to quantify on spreadsheets. Systems and processes are cleaner, more predictable. He smiled slightly. What Thomas never grasped is that our clients don't pay us millions for our systems and processes. They pay us for the trust that you and your team have built with them, relationship by relationship, year by year. His words echoed my own thoughts so closely that I felt a renewed appreciation for why Richard had built Meridian successfully in the first place. Despite his recent delegation missteps, he fundamentally understood what made the company valuable. "The client calls will be difficult," I acknowledged, returning to the immediate challenge. "Trust, once questioned, is hard to rebuild. But not impossible," Richard countered. "Especially when the person delivering the message is someone they already trust implicitly." He gave me a meaningful look. "That's why your role as CCO isn't just about managing relationships, Ellie. It's about being the living embodiment of our commitment to those relationships, something Thomas could never understand or replicate." The next morning, Saturday, found me back at Meridian despite the weekend. The executive team had decided to move quickly on client communications, scheduling calls with the affected clients for Monday. That left the weekend to prepare detailed briefings on exactly what information had been compromised for each client and what steps we were taking in response. I worked closely with Devi and the security team to construct a precise timeline of Jordan's unauthorized access and determine the specific documents he had shared with Nucor. For each affected client, we created a comprehensive package: what had been compromised, potential implications, remediation steps already taken, and additional security measures being implemented. By Sunday afternoon, 7 detailed client briefings sat on my desk, each personalized to address the specific concerns and technical vulnerabilities of the affected relationship. As I reviewed them one final time, my phone rang. Richard's number. "Ellie, I'm sorry to interrupt your weekend work, but there's been a development you should know about," he said when I answered. "Our legal team received a cease and desist letter from Nucor Systems this morning, denying any wrongdoing and threatening litigation if we defame them to clients." I was momentarily speechless. The audacity was stunning. "They're threatening us? After receiving stolen confidential client information?" "It appears to be a preemptive move," Richard explained. "They must know we've discovered the breach and anticipate our client communications. The letter claims they received anonymized technical specifications as part of a standard vendor evaluation process and had no knowledge the information was confidential or improperly obtained." "That's demonstrably false," I replied, thinking of the evidence we had uncovered. The documents Jordan sent contained client-specific details that couldn't possibly be considered anonymized. "Our legal team agrees. They're preparing a response that essentially calls Nucor's bluff. If they pursue litigation, all the evidence becomes public record, hardly the outcome they would want." I considered the implications. This actually strengthens our position with clients in a way. It confirms that Nucor received their information and knew it was valuable enough to try to legally protect their access to it. "Exactly," Richard agreed. "Our general counsel suggested we reference the cease and desist in our client discussions, carefully, of course, but as evidence that we're taking this so seriously that the other party is already attempting to prevent our disclosures." After further discussion of legal strategy, we ended the call. I returned to my review of the client briefings with renewed purpose. Nucor's aggressive response indicated they recognized the value of what they had obtained: proprietary integration, details that represented years of collaborative work with our largest clients. Monday morning arrived with a mixture of determination and apprehension. The first client call was scheduled for 9 a.m. with Christine Walsh at Peterson Group. Richard joined me in my office, both of us dressed formally despite the video call format. This wasn't a conversation for casual business attire. Christine appeared on screen precisely at 9, her expression already concerned. "Ellie, Richard, this sounds serious from the meeting request. What's happening?" We proceeded carefully through the disclosure, explaining that an internal investigation had uncovered unauthorized access to certain client integration specifications, including some of Peterson Group's proprietary systems. We detailed exactly what information had been compromised, emphasized that no operational access to systems had occurred, and outlined the steps already taken, including terminations and security enhancements. Christine listened intently, her expression growing increasingly troubled. When we finished the formal briefing, she was silent for several moments. "I appreciate the transparency," she finally said. "Many companies would have tried to bury this or minimize it. The fact that you're being so forthright about exactly what happened and taking such decisive action, it matters." Relief washed through me. This was the best possible initial reaction. Recognition of our integrity in handling the breach, rather than immediate focus on damages or liability. "We value our relationship with Peterson too much to approach this any other way," I replied. "Sincerely. Your trust is fundamental to everything we do together." Christine nodded slowly. "I'll need to brief our security team and leadership, of course, and we'll want to take you up on that independent security audit offer." She paused. "But from my perspective, this was handled exactly as it should be, swiftly, transparently, with appropriate consequences for those responsible." The call concluded on a cautiously positive note, with Christine expressing continued commitment to our partnership while requesting regular updates on the ongoing investigation. As we ended the video connection, Richard exhaled deeply. "One down, 6 to go," he said. "That went as well as could be expected." Christine has always valued directness, I noted, and she's been burned by vendors who've hidden issues before. Our approach aligned with her values. The remaining calls followed a similar pattern throughout the day, though each client naturally had different concerns and questions based on their specific situations. Alan at Westfield was particularly focused on whether Nucor's approach to their CTO constituted a security threat requiring additional scrutiny. John at AmeriCorp wanted detailed technical assurances about the specific integration points that had been exposed. By late afternoon, all 7 calls had been completed. None of the affected clients had indicated intent to terminate their relationship with Meridian, though all had requested enhanced security measures and ongoing transparency about the investigation. It was the best possible outcome given the fee, circumstances, damaged trust, but not broken beyond repair. As Richard and I debriefed in my office after the final call, Marcus appeared in the doorway with a tablet in hand. "Sorry to interrupt, but I thought you'd want to see this immediately," he said, handing the tablet to Richard. "It just went live on their website." Richard scanned the screen, his eyebrows rising, then passed the tablet to me. It displayed a press release from Nucor Systems announcing the appointment of Thomas Reed as their new Chief Operating Officer, effective immediately. The release praised his extensive experience in operational excellence and client relationship management at Meridian Tech Solutions and highlighted his vision for more efficient, standardized approaches to enterprise client management. "Well, that confirms the connection beyond any doubt," I observed, handing the tablet back to Marcus. "And suggests this may have been the plan all along." Richard's expression hardened. Using his position at Meridian to extract confidential information, then jumping ship to a competitor who would benefit from that information. It's beyond unethical. He turned to Marcus. "Make sure our legal team sees this. It strengthens our position if there's any question about Thomas's involvement." After Marcus left, Richard remained standing by the window, his posture rigid with barely contained anger. "My sister's son," he said quietly, "using my trust to damage the company I built." I understood his sense of betrayal went beyond business considerations. Family complicated everything, especially in closely held companies like Meridian where personal and professional boundaries often blurred. What Thomas did was wrong, I acknowledged. But in a way, he's done Meridian a service by revealing a vulnerability before it could cause irreparable damage. Richard looked at me questioningly. "Think about it," I continued. "If his restructuring plan had gone through, if I had been terminated, the client management system replaced, the relationship-based approach dismantled in favor of standardization, Meridian would have lost what makes it special. What makes clients willing to pay premium rates for our services?" I stood up, moving to join him at the window. Instead, his actions have reinforced exactly why your original vision for Meridian was correct, why relationships matter more than systems, why trust is our actual product. Richard considered this perspective, his expression gradually softening. You're finding the silver lining in a situation I've been viewing only as a crisis and a betrayal. It is those things, I agreed. But it's also an opportunity to recommit to what Meridian does best, building and maintaining the architecture of trust that keeps clients loyal through challenges exactly like this one. As we looked out at the Columbus skyline, the Meridian logo illuminated against the darkening evening sky, I felt an unexpected sense of optimism despite the difficulties of the past week. Thomas Reed had tried to reshape Meridian according to his vision of standardization and efficiency. In doing so, he had inadvertently strengthened the company's commitment to the relationship-based approach he had so fundamentally misunderstood. The investigation into the data breach would continue. Legal considerations regarding Nucor and Thomas would need to be addressed. Client trust would require ongoing nurturing and reinforcement. But through it all, one truth had been reaffirmed beyond any doubt. In the business of trust, relationships weren't inefficient liabilities to be eliminated. They were the essential foundation upon which everything else was built. Thomas Reed had fired me without knowing I held the company's main contracts. But his greater mistake was failing to recognize that those contracts were merely the visible manifestation of something far more powerful: the network of trust, understanding, and mutual value that connected Meridian to its clients. A network that could be damaged by betrayal, but also strengthened through honesty, accountability, and genuine commitment to the relationships at its core. 6 months after the Nucor incident, I stood at the podium in Meridian's largest conference room, addressing our annual client appreciation event. The space hummed with positive energy as representatives from over 50 client companies mingled with Meridian team members. Richard stood nearby, engaged in animated conversation with Christine from Peterson Group and Alan from Westfield. What began as a crisis became an opportunity, I concluded, wrapping up my presentation on Meridian's enhanced client trust framework. The architecture of trust we've built together isn't just about technology integration. It's about human connection, transparency, and mutual success. Thank you for continuing this journey with us. Applause filled the room as I stepped away from the microphone. Several clients approached to share their appreciation for the ways we'd strengthened our partnerships in recent months. The Nucor data breach, rather than destroying client relationships, had ultimately reinforced them through our transparent handling of the situation. Later that evening, as the event wound down, Richard joined me on the outdoor terrace overlooking the city lights. The board approved the expansion plan, he said, handing me a glass of sparkling water. 3 new regional offices over the next 18 months, with you leading the client relationship strategy for each launch. I smiled, taking a moment to absorb the news. That's fantastic. The Denver market especially has been asking for local presence. Richard nodded. It's a far cry from where we were 6 months ago, isn't it? Back then, I worried we might lose our major clients. Now we're expanding to meet demand. The contrast wasn't lost on me. The days following Thomas's departure and the discovery of the data breach had been challenging and uncertain. Yet through transparent communication, enhanced security measures, and redoubled commitment to relationship-based service, we had not only retained every client, but strengthened most partnerships. Have you heard anything about Nucor recently? I asked. Richard's expression tightened slightly. Their funding round fell through last month. Apparently, potential investors were concerned about the ethical cloud surrounding their leadership. He didn't need to elaborate. Thomas's actions had created reputation problems that followed him to his new position. They've pivoted to a much smaller target market, avoiding direct competition with Meridian. And Thomas? Still there, though in a reduced capacity according to industry gossip, the COO title without the influence he expected. Richard shook his head. My sister is disappointed, of course, but even she acknowledges he made his own choices. Our conversation was interrupted by Devi approaching with a tablet in hand, excitement evident in her expression. Ellie, the new client platform enhancements just passed final testing, she announced. The collaborative document feature works perfectly. Clients can now co-edit integration specifications in real time while maintaining all security protocols. This was the culmination of months of development, expanding my original client management system into a true collaborative platform where clients became active participants in the documentation and evolution of their solutions rather than passive recipients. That's perfect timing, I replied. Show Alan from Westfield before he leaves. They've been asking for this capability since last year. As Devi hurried off to demonstrate the new features, Richard watched with evident satisfaction. You've transformed how we think about client technology, he observed. Not just tools for us to manage relationships, but platforms for clients to actively engage with us. It's the natural evolution, I explained. Thomas saw client relationships as inefficiencies to eliminate through standardization. I see them as our core competency to enhance through thoughtful technology. Richard nodded thoughtfully. Which reminds me, the board has another matter they'd like to discuss with you next week, about my succession planning. My surprise must have shown on my face because Richard smiled. Don't look so shocked. I'm not retiring tomorrow, but at 62, I need to consider Meridian's future leadership. After watching you handle the new core crisis and lead our subsequent growth, the board has expressed interest in developing a path for you to potentially assume the CEO role within the next few years. I was momentarily speechless. From terminated employee to potential CEO in less than a year. A trajectory I couldn't have imagined when Thomas Reed had so casually dismissed me from the company. I'm honored they would consider me, I finally managed, though it's not something I've actively sought. The best leaders rarely do, Richard replied. They're too busy creating value to campaign for titles. He looked out at the city skyline, the Meridian logo illuminated against the night sky. What you understand, what Thomas never grasped, is that Meridian's value isn't in our technology or processes. It's in the trust we've built, relationship by relationship, year by year. The next morning, I arrived early at my office, taking a moment to appreciate the view of Columbus coming to life in the early sunlight. My desk calendar showed a full day of client strategy sessions, interspersed with internal meetings about the upcoming regional expansions. A notification appeared on my computer, my daily client relationship dashboard showing real-time metrics across our portfolio. Client satisfaction rates stood at 98%, a historic high. Renewal forecasts indicated 100% retention for the coming quarter. New business referrals from existing clients had increased 43% year over year. These weren't just numbers, they represented the tangible results of our recommitment to relationship-based business after the new core incident. Each percentage point reflected countless conversations, personalized solutions, and moments of genuine connection between Meridian team members and our clients. My phone buzzed with a message from Alan at Westfield. The collaborative platform. Demo blew everyone away. Our team wants to be first in line for implementation. Dinner next week to discuss? I smiled as I replied affirmatively. 6 months ago, we had been focused on damage control, explaining a data breach, rebuilding fragile trust, assuring clients their information was secure. Now we were planning expansions, launching innovative collaborative tools, and strengthening partnerships that had weathered a significant challenge and emerged stronger. Jennifer appeared in my doorway with my schedule for the day and a cup of coffee. Richard mentioned the board's interest in succession planning, she said with a knowing smile. Congratulations seem in order. It's preliminary, I demurred. though I couldn't help returning her smile. A lot can happen in a few years. True, she acknowledged. But if recent history has taught us anything, it's that relationships and trust ultimately prevail over shortcuts and schemes. As my day began in earnest, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. Thomas Reed had fired me without knowing I held the company's main contracts. His vision of business efficiency had prioritized systems over relationships, standardization over personalization, cost-cutting over trust building. In doing so, he had inadvertently revealed the true source of Meridian's value, not its technology or processes, but its commitment to human connection in an increasingly automated world. His failure had become the company's opportunity to recommit to its foundational strength, with me helping to lead that renewal. The architecture of trust I had built over 7 years hadn't just saved my career. It had transformed it, elevating me to a position where I could shape Meridian's future around the principles that had always guided my approach to client relationships. As I prepared for my first meeting of the day, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for the journey, difficult as parts of it had been. Thomas Reed's short-sighted decision had ultimately strengthened not just my position, but Meridian's commitment to the relationship-based approach he had so fundamentally misunderstood. That, perhaps, was the most meaningful revenge of all. Not personal vindication, but the vindication of a philosophy that valued human connection over corporate efficiency, trust over transactions, relationships over restructuring. A philosophy that would now guide Meridian's future long after Thomas Reed's brief, disruptive tenure had faded into a cautionary tale about the true nature of business value in a world hungry for authentic connection. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.